The church smelled faintly of lilies and candle wax, the kind of scent that clings to you long after you leave. I stood beside Aaron's casket, my hand resting lightly on the polished wood, numb to the stream of condolences from people whose names I barely remembered. Every hug, every "I'm so sorry," was another reminder that my husband of 11 years was gone, taken by a sudden aneurysm that gave us no warning and no chance to say goodbye. Boston's spring air was damp when I stepped outside after the service, my heels sinking slightly into the grass as the crowd drifted toward the reception hall. I moved through it all as though underwater, shaking hands, accepting plates of food I wouldn't touch, nodding when people spoke but not really hearing. That night, when the last guest left and I was finally alone, I sat on the edge of our bed staring at the empty pillow beside me. I thought if I stayed still enough, maybe I could pretend Aaron was just running late. The calls from my mother began the next morning. At first, she checked on me in the way mothers do, asking if I was eating, if I'd slept at all. But by the third call, her tone shifted. She reminded me that Callista's baby celebration was coming up next week, that it had already been planned before Aaron's death. That family shows up for family. I told her I couldn't. I wasn't ready. The thought of being in a room full of chatter and cake and smiling faces felt almost cruel, but she kept going, softening her voice as if that would make the words land easier. Aaron always said family comes first. Maren, you know he'd want you there, somewhere between exhaustion and guilt. I agreed. We ended the call with her promising to save me a seat near the front. That evening, I stood in our quiet kitchen, the hum of the refrigerator filling the silence, and realized I'd just committed myself to walking straight into a celebration I had no desire to attend. A week later, I pulled into the narrow driveway beside Callista's rental house, the spring wind rattling the loose siding. The place was small, with faded shutters and a yard littered with toys. I cut the engine and sat there for a moment, hands still gripping the wheel, willing myself to step out. The sound of laughter drifted from the backyard, high and bright, the kind that doesn't match the heaviness pressing in your chest. I smoothed my black skirt left over from the funeral and grabbed the wrapped gift from the passenger seat. Callista's friend opened the door before I knocked. I recognized her vaguely from past family gatherings but couldn't recall her name. Oh, Maren. You made it, she said, her voice polite but strained, as if she'd been caught off guard. She stepped aside, and I walked in. The living room was strung with blue balloons and paper streamers, a banner declaring Happy Baby Jonah across one wall. But my eyes went first to the small knot of people in the kitchen. They were strangers, leaning close to each other, whispering. Their voices stopped abruptly when I passed by. In the backyard, my parents sat together at a picnic table, their posture unusually stiff. My father's jaw tightened when he saw me, though he stood to give me a brief hug. We weren't sure you'd come, he said. Of course I came, I murmured, setting the gift on a nearby table. As I looked around, I noticed the subtle changes in the air. Conversations dipped into silence when I drew near. People smiled too quickly, too politely, their eyes sliding away as if they'd been caught mid-thought. I told myself it was the widow effect, no one quite knowing what to say to the woman who had buried her husband just days earlier. Still, something about the way the backyard felt too careful, too staged, left me uneasy. I was standing by the drink table, pretending to be interested in a plastic cup of lemonade, when the back door opened and Callista stepped out, baby Jonah on her hip, her smile wide and oddly triumphant. Callista moved to the center of the yard, the chatter fading until only the creak of lawn chairs and the hum of the neighbor's mower filled the space. Jonah sat perched on her hip, dressed in a tiny button-down shirt and bow tie, blinking against the sunlight. Thank you all for coming to celebrate Jonah's special day, she began, her voice carrying just enough to reach every corner of the yard. This past year has been full of surprises and challenges." She paused, adjusting Jonah on her hip, her gaze sweeping the guests. "And I've been keeping a secret, one I can't hide any longer." A faint ripple of curiosity moved through the crowd. My mother lowered her eyes to her lap. My father's hands tightened on the table. "Jonah," Callista said, placing her hand lightly on the child's head, "is not Tyler's son. He's Aaron's." The words landed like a dropped glass, sharp, shattering, impossible to ignore. Conversations stopped completely. Someone gasped. My father's head jerked toward me. My mother's face went pale. Callista kept going, her tone practiced. Aaron wanted to make sure his son was provided for before he died. He updated his will. She reached into her purse, unfolding a single page with slow precision. According to this, half of Marin's $750,000 house is to be passed to Jonah. The will fluttered faintly in the breeze. Aaron's signature scrawled across the bottom. Around me, eyes shifted between Callista, the paper, and my face, searching for a reaction. I didn't give them what they were looking for. Instead, I felt the corner of my mouth tug upward, not a smile of amusement. Not exactly, but one that came when a situation was so absurd, so wildly untrue, that the only thing left to do was acknowledge the ridiculousness of it. "Oh," I said evenly, meeting Callista's gaze. "I see." Her eyes flickered, as if she'd been expecting anger, maybe outrage. I offered neither. The silence that followed stretched long and taut, the air thick with speculation. I set my untouched lemonade on the table, my fingers steady despite the pounding in my ears, because while Callista clearly thought she'd just detonated the biggest revelation of my life, she didn't know what I knew, and that was going to make all the difference. Callista's announcement might have rattled anyone else, but for me, it was almost surreal, like watching a poorly scripted play when you already know the ending. The truth had been cemented years ago, in moments she never knew I saw, and details she couldn't possibly guess. It started at a summer barbecue at our parents' house. Aaron was at the grill, flipping burgers. When I noticed Callista leaning a little too close, her hand lingering on his arm as she laughed at something he'd said. It wasn't just casual affection, it had a charge to it, the kind of spark meant to test boundaries. I didn't confront her that day, but that night, as Aaron and I cleared dishes in our kitchen, he set down a plate and looked at me with that steady gaze of his. "I need to tell you something," he said, "while you were inside. Callista made a pass at me." He explained it plainly, how she'd told him he was too good for just one woman, how she'd brushed her fingers over his hand in a way that was anything but sisterly. He'd shut it down immediately, telling her it was out of line. We agreed, right then, to keep our distance from her. Invitations with her name on them suddenly had conflicts. Family visits were timed so she wouldn't be alone with him. We didn't make a scene, but we kept our guard up. 2 years later, Aaron started complaining of an ache that wouldn't go away. Tests revealed a varicocele that needed surgery. During the consultation, his doctor recommended a vasectomy, at the same time less invasive than doing it separately and the surest way to prevent complications from recurring. It was a hard conversation. We'd spent years hoping for a child, enduring rounds of IVF that led nowhere. But by then, we'd accepted our life together as enough. For his health. We agreed. The surgery was done in early spring, 2 full years before Jonah was conceived. Only Aaron, his doctor, and I ever knew. It wasn't something we advertised, not to family, not to friends. After all the questions about our childless marriage, we had learned to protect our privacy. So when Callista stood in her backyard, declaring Jonah to be Aaron's son, I didn't feel the ground shift beneath me. I felt something closer to grim certainty because I already had the one fact that made her claim impossible. Aaron had always been the kind of man who balanced optimism with quiet readiness. He wasn't a pessimist, far from it, but he believed in having things in order, just in case. That side of him became sharper after Callista's first inappropriate comment and the awkward family dinners that followed. He started keeping notes. At first, I didn't realize what he was doing. But one evening, I found him at his desk, typing on his laptop with a stack of papers beside him. "Just making sure there's a record," he said when I asked. He didn't sound angry, just calm, as if documenting my sister's boundary crossing was as routine as paying a bill. When Callista sent a text that strayed too far from casual complimenting the way he looked when no one else was watching, Aaron printed it and tucked it into a file. If she lingered too long in conversation or brushed his arm in a way that wasn't accidental, he wrote down the date, the place, and exactly what was said. Around that time, he also met with James Halverson, an attorney he trusted implicitly. They updated his will to leave everything to me. No contingencies, no hidden clauses. He told James about Callista's behavior, even handed over a few printed messages, just in case anything ever came of it. When he came home that day, he mentioned it almost in passing, sliding his hands into his pockets like it was no big deal. Better to be prepared. Just in case. He said, I remember rolling my eyes, telling him he was overthinking it. But that wasn't all. A few months later, he asked me to go with him to the bank. We sat across from the branch manager as Aaron signed the papers for a safety deposit box. Inside, he placed an envelope containing the updated will, the file of printed messages, and a short letter to me explaining where everything was kept. He locked it with a quiet click, turned to me, and smiled. Now I can stop thinking about it. At the time, I thought it was an exercise in paranoia, a way for him to feel in control of something that wasn't even a real threat. I humored him, kissed him on the cheek, and forgot about it. Now, standing in the wake of Callista's public accusation, that forgotten lockbox felt less like a symbol of worry and more like a lifeline, and I knew exactly where I'd be going in the morning after the party. I woke before the sun, my mind still replaying Callista's words in the backyard. I didn't linger over coffee or breakfast. By 8, I was standing inside the cool, hushed lobby of our bank, the faint scent of polished wood and paper in the air. The branch manager, Mr. Keating, had known Aaron and me for years. His expression softened when I told him why I was there. Of course, Mrs. Calloway, he said quietly, leading me down the narrow hallway to the vault. The metal box was heavier than I remembered. I carried it to the small viewing room, the door clicking shut behind me, and set it on the table. My hands hesitated over the key for a moment, almost as if opening it would confirm that Aaron really wasn't coming back, that all I had left of him now fit inside a locked rectangle of steel. Inside was a neat stack of envelopes, each labeled in Aaron's handwriting. The first contained the real notarized will, no ambiguity, no contingencies, leaving everything to me. The next held his medical records, clearly stating the date and outcome of his vasectomy, 2 years before Jonah's birth. The language was clinical, detached, but to me it read like a shield. At the bottom lay a sealed envelope with my name on it. My fingers trembled as I opened it and unfolded the letter inside. Marin, if you're reading this, it means something happened I couldn't prevent. I hope it's years from now, but just in case. I wanted you to have what you'd need to protect yourself. I know how much you value family, how hard you try to believe the best in people. But not everyone who shares your blood has your best interests at heart. Don't let anyone take what we built together, not in life, and not after. I love you beyond words. Aaron, I read it twice, each line pressing deeper into me until I felt steadier than I had in weeks. Callista might have expected me to flinch, to fall apart under her accusations, but now I had Aaron's words, his planning, and his proof. It was time to make my next move. That afternoon, I sat across from James Halverson in his book-lined office. The real will and Callista's version spread out between us. James adjusted his glasses, scanning the forged document with a faint, humorless smile. "This wouldn't last 5 minutes under scrutiny," he said. "The phrasing is wrong. The legal references are sloppy. And the signature? Well, I've seen Aaron's too many times to mistake it. This is a poor forgery." His certainty steadied me. Still, I knew Callista wouldn't back down just because James declared it fake. She'd need to see her lies dismantled piece by piece. James leaned back. "If you're willing, I suggest bringing in someone who can uncover her motive and maybe give us leverage to shut this down quietly." That's how I met Lyle Torres, a private investigator James trusted. He was a stocky man with a calm, unblinking gaze that made it clear he'd heard every excuse in the book. I gave him everything I knew: Callista's spotty job history, her relationship with Tyler, and the timeline of Jonah's birth. He listened without interrupting, jotting notes in a small leather-bound pad. 3 days later, Lyle called me back to James's office. He slid a folder across the desk, each page a nail in the coffin of Callista's story. Callista was drowning in debt, over $70,000 in credit cards and personal loans. She was 4 months behind on rent, facing eviction by the end of the month. Tyler had left shortly after Jonah was born, sending only the occasional child support payment, and even those were irregular. Then came the messages' screenshots between Callista and a friend named Justine. In them, Callista spelled out her plan. "The house is worth at least $750K if I play this right. I'll get my share. Dave's helping me with the will, found Aaron's signature online. Looks legit." The words were cold, calculated, and damning. Looking at them, I felt a flicker of something sharper than anger clarity. Now I didn't just have the truth. I had the full map of every move she'd made, and I was ready to decide exactly how to use it. I called Callista the next morning and asked her to come by in the afternoon to talk about the will. Her voice on the phone was almost smug, as if she believed I was ready to hand over what she wanted. When she arrived, I led her into the living room where 2 chairs faced each other across the coffee table. On it sat a glass of water, a neat folder, and a small audio recorder. "I'd like to record our conversation," I said. "That way we both have a clear record of what's said." She agreed without hesitation. I started by asking her to walk me through the timeline of her supposed affair with Aaron when it began, where they met, what was said. The more details she offered, the more tangled her answers became. She claimed they met at a downtown hotel but couldn't remember the room number, the days of the week, or even whether it was before or after Jonah was conceived. Once the contradictions piled high enough, I opened the folder and laid out 3 documents. "First," I said, sliding the medical records toward her, "Aaron had a vasectomy 2 years before Jonah was born. These are from his doctor. It was successful." "That makes your story impossible." Her face paled. I placed the next document in front of her, the authentic. "Notarized will. Prepared by James. This is Aaron's real will. It leaves everything to me. The one you presented is a forgery. And we can prove it." Finally, I set down Lyle's report, detailing her debts, eviction notice, Tyler's absence, and the messages she'd sent about forging the will. She stared at it, her shoulders sagging. When she finally spoke, her voice was small. "Jonah's Tyler's. I made the whole thing up. I didn't know what else to do. I'm out of options." I clicked off the recorder, keeping my expression steady. "Then we're going to talk about exactly what happens next." I told Callista she had 2 choices: face criminal charges for fraud and forgery, or accept terms that would protect Jonah while holding her accountable. No money from my house, no lump sum. Instead, I'd set up a trust fund for Jonah's medical and educational needs. In return, she'd publicly admit the truth, start therapy, and maintain steady employment, if she failed on any point. The support would end. She hesitated, but desperation won out. We agreed her confession would happen at a family dinner that weekend. When the night came, the air at my dining table was tight with unspoken questions. My parents sat stiffly, waiting. Callista stared at her plate, then finally spoke. Jonah isn't Aaron's. He's Tyler's. I forged the will because I was broke and scared. Silence followed, broken only by my father's sharp inhale. My mother's eyes darted between us. Why didn't you just ask for help? She demanded. Because you always help me, Callista said, her voice cracking. You always fix everything. I thought you'd find a way to fix this. Too. The words hung in the air like an admission none of us had been ready to hear. I told them there would be no more bailouts, no pretending things were fine. Jonah would have what he needed, but trust between Callista and me would take time if it returned at all. My father nodded reluctantly. My mother looked down, as if seeing a truth she'd avoided for years. It wasn't resolution, but it was the line I needed to draw, and I intended to hold it. A year after that dinner, the trust fund I established for Jonah is doing exactly what it was meant to, covering his ongoing medical care and setting aside money for his education. Callista has honored our agreement. She's been in therapy for months, holds a steady job at a small accounting firm, and keeps our contact polite but limited. We speak mostly about Jonah, and that's enough. In that same year, I've built something of my own, the Aaron Calloway Foundation for Legal Education. It funds scholarships for students from disadvantaged backgrounds who want to study corporate law. It's the kind of work Aaron would have championed, a way to keep his influence alive in the world. I've learned more in 12 months than I had in the decade before, that boundaries are not walls. They are the framework that keeps love intact, that preparation is not paranoia, it's power, and that grief doesn't vanish. It learns to live beside the parts of you that are still growing. This morning, I stand in the garden, surrounded by daffodils Aaron planted the fall before he died. They sway in the breeze, a riot of yellow against the green, their return as steady as the turning of the seasons. I still miss him every day, but the ache no longer swallows me whole. I am different now, more cautious, more deliberate, and somehow stronger. Aaron may be gone, but the love he left behind still shields me, and I intend to keep building my own protection for whatever comes next.